Um, I love Noun Town. That's so cute.
Thanks.
Tell me how you think it went.
It went okay. Not exactly as planned, but I did my best to adjust more than I had in like earlier lessons. So Downtown, that's why it was like a welcome back because we had done Downtown previously, but it was quite a long time ago. It didn't go as well as I had hoped because I had felt like they had understood nouns a little bit better. But then it was a good gauge. I was able to tell kind of where they were struggling, who was struggling most, and with what ideas. And so I thought it went all right. I think towards the end of the lesson, I was starting to figure out more and more how to adjust and like prompt them with questions or have them slow down and just like look at every single word and things like that. It was partly because we're also going over a new section in the book, and we had a new student that day. That was her first day. So I was kind of like trying to feel out where she was at, and so it went all right. I felt like it wasn't necessarily the funnest lesson for them, but we tried to make it interactive.
Okay, good. So I'll probably ask you some more questions about that as we go through. New student always tends to add a new layer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. This is standard 8, and so it talks about asking questions, engaging students, switching from that like teaching mode to the directing mode to the coaching mode, and then monitoring and adjusting. So I think you do a really phenomenal job of asking questions. Who remembers? What are nouns? Do you see open? What is open? Do we have a person? I mean, I just started writing like questions that you were asking, and it went on and on throughout the lesson. And so I think that you definitely do well in that area. In terms of engaging students, you had planned for a lot of activities to engage students. So there was the song, which I love because I think it's so developmentally appropriate. You wrote people, place, and thing on the board, which was phenomenal because for your ELLs, they need to hear it, see it, speak it, read it, right? The noun town was a great way to bring it to their level. And I think actually, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think you can capitalize on that. It was very hands-on when you gave them their own piece of paper while there was someone at the board doing what they were being asked to do. I love the magic finger. I think that's great because it does the one-to-one correspondence. The partner work was a good way to collaborate. And then the choral reading, I also feel is really helpful for engaging your learners, but also solidifying kind of that reading, speaking concept for ELLs. So how do you feel about their engagement?
I felt like it was better than the first lesson where we did it because I felt like it was more of like one person watching, other people like thinking, or one person doing and other people more of like thinking and watching. Whereas this time the engagement was better because they had to participate as well while the person was doing it on the board. So I thought that kind of kept them in the activity more, which I didn't think it was perfect, but I thought it was certainly an improvement from the first time we had tried Downtown.
Good, good. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to jump. I'm not going to do directing and coaching quite yet. We're going to talk about monitoring and adjusting. Okay. So definitely part of your adjustment was to make allotment for the new student. So you said, let's review our nouns for our new student, which was really important. And that probably was something you had to add on the fly, right?
Because they're all just kind of like, we know this. And I'm like, oh, well.
Right, right.
Hope you're fun.
So that was good. There were a few times when you were, prompting them to get back to you. Eyes on me. There was another, I can't remember the other. Maybe you said eyes on me twice, but both times you were monitoring for whether or not they were tracking you, which was good. There was a student who thought that tree was a noun because it was a place, which that was a tricky one because that was confusing for them because they're confused over in the. So in
Yeah,
the designates, right, that there's a place where the monkey is. It would answer the question, where is the monkey? And so
exactly.
it's okay to kind of talk about that a little bit because then you don't leave them wondering. Um, while the tree is a thing,
Hmm.
it in this sense it serves the purpose of being a place.
That's true. And I felt like, because there was so much going on in the lesson, that actually did occur to me as she was asking that too. And the problem is, though, because I really did want to explain that to her, I was torn. And I was trying to simplify it as much as possible for like future content that they're going to be looking at this year until they could have like greater understanding in English. But I was like, man, because this is complicated and it does work in both situations.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I was trying to also lead to the fact that later there were words like grass and flower, and they were confused about like the concept of plants being things. So I was trying to like connect like a tree is a plant and plants are things. So we're just gonna like remember like plants are things generally, at least. So that was a hard one for me though, because I didn't want to like misinform her because it was a location too.
Right, right. And as they diagram sentences, that question of where is it taking place will be
Mm-hmm.
one that they're asked. So, okay, you were checking in as they were doing their partner work, and your TA was also doing that, which was good. There was at one point when you said, "Do you agree?" And some of them said yes, and a couple of them said no, and they seemed confused. And so this is the part that I kind of want to dive into with you and talk a little bit about how. So when that happens, how do you? I feel like there's still kind of this movement in terms of you going from a direct teaching stance to a coaching. Like I feel like you're still
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure that piece out. What do you think about that? Is that a true statement for you?
Oh no, I agree. It's difficult for me to figure out like when to just let them go with it and when not to. And it's at this weird point in the year where I'm liking the facilitator thing more, and there's like so much like strain to just shove them through it and like just get through the book and have them understand as much as possible, but like you can't linger. And so I'm like really hoping now that, because like I saw that too, like I felt it when it was happening, and then watching the video again, I could see it happening. And it's like I hate those opportunities where I don't dive into it more. We used to just have like lengthy conversations, and I would have them feel it out more, like, oh, what do you think? And then why is that? Okay, explain it to your friends. And that's like what I really wanted to do. Like looking at it, I'm like, that would have been more ideal. And instead, it's just like, no, that's not why. Like, here, let's use other examples, and hopefully you can catch on to the pattern. And I feel like that's not good enough. That's just how it ended up going that time.
I think they're capable, and I think what ends up happening when you're standing in front and you're direct teaching
Mm-hmm.
is that those students who are still a little bit confused would benefit more from you letting those who really understand it to be independent,
Mm-hmm.
and then those who are confused for you to be working with and the TA to be working with.
Okay.
So one of the suggestions I have is that before you start the lesson, don't set up the teaching partners.
Mm-hmm.
Wait and see who is really grasping it, because in that moment when you said, do you agree, and there were like some definite yeses, and then there were some that said no, and then they kind of just glazed over. That's the moment when you can go, okay, I want, and you name the kids who just showed you that they understood, right? And you have them go do partner work. And then you pull that little group that still needs some more attention into a smaller group and work with them. Because I think the thing that you do is you ask a lot of questions and you're monitoring. But then my question is, what do you do with that information? When you're monitoring where they are and they reveal to you where they are, then what? And that's the place where you need to spend some time thinking about is, okay, so when I see that 2/3 of them are good and they can do this
Mm-hmm.
independently, what do I do with that other third? Because they're really needing to be pulled in and you're really needing to dive in with them. What are the concepts that you're not getting? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. So like the formative part is there, but then I'm not like really
Mm-hmm.
acting on it as much as I should be. And I agree, like now that you mentioned like that, honestly, there's a number of them. It's like you shouldn't even be in this lesson. Go by yourself, finish the book because you can, like finish the page because you can, and then we can check it after. Whereas the other ones, having them be like, okay, let's work together, talk together, and like we'll go word by word and see if we can understand which ones are nouns and why. And I think
Right.
that would have been helpful.
So even the noun town, you could have really capitalized on that by having them work independently on
Mhm.
noun town, like having them have their own noun town and placing the words that belonged in noun town.
Mm.
Um, that could have been more practice where you're watching. Because the other thing I notice is they are really not good at working independently. Some of them are very needy when it comes to
Mhm.
not knowing what to do. And so part of having them, releasing them to work independently is setting that time up so that they succeed, so that they know what the expectations are. Like maybe you say, I'm going to set a timer, and before the timer goes off, you cannot ask me questions. You can ask your neighbor. You
Mhm.
can read the directions a couple more times, but you cannot, you have to instill in them that they're capable of doing this because it felt like they just wanted you to do it when they were at their seat.
I agree. A lot of them do that. I've been noticing that lately. And I think, yeah, like there was quite a few issues where I'm like, I totally should have fixed that. I think that I was like catering to the new student too much because I wanted it to also be a demonstration for her because I felt like she wouldn't come in knowing nouns. She's not really talking or wanting to do stuff. Like when, especially like when I met her. So I felt like it'd be a good way of like easing her in and like having her figure it out, but I shouldn't have built it so much around her. She can just kind of work her way into class and then I can help her more like separately. And I have noticed like as the parent demands increase, the parents also, the kids aren't pushed to do their homework. Like they just don't do it when they don't feel like it. And when it is completed, their parent clearly did it. So it's like they don't really care about like figuring it out. And I tell them like the problem is not trying. Like if you get it wrong, that's okay. And that's fine. And trying is good. So that's when you did a good job. But when you don't try, that's when it's not as good. So give it a try. But they don't care.
And it's, you are fighting against a cultural norm and belief system, right? And so that's what makes this hard, is that achievement is the goal, period.
Pretty much, yeah. Any sense of failure, which is just trying at school and not getting it right, which is like,
Right.
why would you get it right the first time? But it's seen as like you suck. But that's not the case. That's just the learning process.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that can happen anywhere. So I need to figure out how to work with that, especially because like I don't have any control over the fact that they don't get any better outside of the classroom. It's basically in the classroom only that they're getting the exposure. So I need to like find my own way to work it in the classroom then.
And is this class a class, like, do you see multiple classes, or is this,
This is my main class, although I do have after school lessons with a number of classes.
and do you
So,
teach anything other than grammar and language?
oh yeah. I teach history, which is like way more interesting. I've been teaching speech, which is just like its own thing. Um, like writing courses, so they're writing stories. So I guess it's still partly language, but history is the one that's most off of that.
But not math.
No, not anymore. That was last year actually. Oh, science. I also teach
Okay.
science.
So, I mean, there's just ways that you can set up some like center time where they're just trying and they don't, they can just explore. That might
Mm-hmm.
help with that, I don't know, that resistance to not do it if they can't do it well. Just setting up
Mm-hmm.
some exploration type stations. And then that would give you an opportunity to pull kids that need work, individually, or we've talked a little bit about that. But let me go back to the rubric. You're doing so many things well. I think that this rubric, this element of monitoring and adjusting and switching from direct teaching to coaching these two things kind of work hand in hand. Because as you're adjusting what you're doing, that also means you're adjusting your role to the students. And so continue to think about how you move from that direct teaching to the coaching and facilitating, and think about how, think about the timing of that, like when, because for the first 20 minutes of your video, you were pretty much direct teaching. There were times when you were at the board with a student and facilitating that student, but think about how to release that a little bit sooner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I was trying by like having them try to place it on their own while the
Yes.
other kids are doing it, and I felt like that was kind of letting them go more.
Yeah.
So I felt like it wasn't too like, I thought I was trying to guide them more, but I could try to like kind of let them do free reign a little bit more.
Yeah, I totally get it. I think actually that activity of them doing the sentence at their seats and then having someone come to their board, that could have come, I think they needed a little bit more independent practice at their tables, like with the nouns and noun town, before they jumped into a sentence. I think it just needed a little more time for them to work and explore that a little bit more. I'll be
I
anxious
think
to
it's
see.
more.
Yeah, I'll be anxious to see. Is Barry your
Yeah.
instructor? I would be anxious to see what he thought about that. I think it was a good lesson. Don't get me wrong. I know that for these last standards, we really need to help you think about, okay, what's your goal? Like, because you're going to write a goal statement and a personal learning plan for, I think it's Unit 9. And so I'm trying to get you to think about, okay, what are the things that you can really try and hone in on and work on moving forward?
Oh, no, I appreciate it. I feel like you've given me like really good insights. And I feel like, I mean, you and I did see a similar thing where I wasn't adjusting as much as I should have. I felt like my adjustment was better than previously, and like, I felt like it started to get on track towards the lesson, but I wasn't making the large adjustments at the time and like regrouping that would have been helpful at the moment. And I feel like my strides in adjusting have been like, now I take the information and I usually apply it to like the next lesson that follows the same topic, but I don't necessarily apply it at the moment the day of. And I try to like, I do it, but not as like dramatically maybe as I should. So I tried to like when I saw they weren't understanding, I tried to ask more like probing questions and like change the flow on the board a little bit and like do it with them. But I could have tried other tactics that would have been like more dramatic and probably more helpful to the group that were different.
Well, and know too that when I'm watching, I don't know what's going on in your head. So I don't know all the adjustments that you've made, right? So that was one of the reasons I wanted for you to talk about that. I mean, I definitely knew there was a new girl in the class, and I picked up on that, so I knew that was probably a big adjustment you were making. But
yeah, she was the very different one, the one that was quiet in the side of the room.
Well, and that was the other thing. Like you said, she was pulling you a lot, and you were focusing so much on her, but I didn't know who she was. So for me, I was like, you keep going back to that same group, and I wasn't sure if they were just really needy or really confused, and so that was good for me to hear too. I think you're definitely proficient in these areas, and in some areas you're outstanding, but it's helping you to move from the proficient to the outstanding. So just continue to think about, and like I said, some of this is going to take some work in setting up the expectations so that they understand what you expect from them when they're doing partner work or when they're doing small group work, that you want them to be as independent as possible. And so even if there's like a card that you could laminate and set out when they're working together, like if I don't know what to do, I can, and then some prompts, I can read the directions, I can ask my partner, I can ask another friend, and then I can ask Miss Tiffany. You know, I mean, there's some scaffolding that you can put in place so that that time is more successful, and that you truly are just able to kind of float among the teaching partners and listen, because that's where you're going to really glean that powerful information when you are hands off and you're not leading at all, and you're listening to how they're how they're interacting, you're going to glean so much about who is understanding and who is not. So, and don't be afraid to let them kind of grapple a little bit with a concept on their own, like, having the words cut out and having them put them in noun town and having them work a little bit on that just on their own would have been maybe a good way to assess quickly, like, okay, who has a pretty good handle on this and who doesn't, and then moving to the sentences, because you're taking the concrete and moving it to the abstract. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And I do think that was a really good suggestion, by the way, about like having the paper that they can reference about who to look to first for answers. Because the thing is, we've actually discussed all of that. I tell them all the time, I like, don't ask me. You have great tools next to you. Your book can tell you and your partner can tell you. But they just don't, they pretend like they don't know that information, even though I tell them like every day, but like those are their best tools. I try to remind them. So having it written and just posted and be like, oh, remember who to check with first, I think that would be helpful, because I do prefer when they work together.
And that could actually be something they take home for their homework. If I'm stuck on my homework, I can, just a little card that we used to use it when we worked with kids in reading. If I'm stuck on a word, I can, with all the strategies. And it had little pictures next to it so that there was a picture clue next to the word so that they understood. But I think that way, that's part of that scaffolding for them to be independent. That way they know, what the expectation is, and it's right there in front of them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, especially
Yeah.
because like right now, the whole independent thing is like, it's gotten crazy at work, especially with the expectations that are coming up in early December for them. It's unrealistic for their age, but working independently is the only way for them to accomplish it. And they are really struggling with that. Like, oh no, I didn't practice it at home. And like, no, whatever. Mom didn't do it, but it wasn't mom's homework. It was your homework. And so like, they need to know they need to take initiative and try.
Yes.
And so I appreciate those tips, because that'll be really helpful for getting them into a better place for the next part.
Good. All right. Well, thank you. Have a good week.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for all of your help. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.